Everyone. My name is Stephen Nunes. I'm a partner with Nextstreet. We are a mission-driven advisory firm focused on supporting small businesses and specific focus on restaurants for today's conversation. Really glad that everyone could join us. Special thanks to DoorDash, who has helped facilitate this really important conversation on the Restaurant Revitalization Fund. I'm really excited today to be joined by Clarence Campbell from Lendistry. Lendistry is a minority-led, technology-enabled CDFI focused on supporting small businesses through the provision of capital and education nationally. And specifically for today's conversation, Lendistry has partnered with the SBA to promote the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, and will be collecting applications directly. So today's conversation, we want to provide more information on the process, more information on what eligibility looks like for the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, required documentation, funding calculations, and the application process. And Clarence from Lendistry can also take you through how to apply directly through Lendistry if you haven't already been able to apply through the SBA or a point of sale provider. So without further ado, I will pass it over to Clarence. Before I do, just a quick housekeeping item. Feel free to post questions on the Q&A. I will be monitoring Q&A constantly during today's conversation. We will save time at the end for questions that are collected, and if any pertinent questions come up along the way, I will make sure that we introduce them into the conversation. So with that, I will pass it over to Clarence.
Great, thank you, Stephen, and good afternoon, everyone. We're excited to join you today. We're going to jump right in as Stephen shared. And Stephen, if you could just let me know if you can see my screen there. All right, perfect. So as Stephen shared, again, my name is Clarence Campbell, and I am the Executive Vice President of Sales for Lendistry, and we are excited to partner with the SBA as we talk about the Restaurant Revitalization Fund. As we look here, again, as Stephen shared, our focus really is around supporting small businesses, primarily through education and also through providing access to capital. And as you can see, there are some of our designations. We're actually certified by the Department of Treasury as a community development financial institution, as well as a community development entity. We're also a member of the San Francisco Federal Home Loan Bank and a direct lender for the SBA. And we are supporting this program nationally. So we are excited to help restaurants throughout the country. So as we jump right in, part of what we're looking at here, and I will share that this document, this guide, can be accessed by through our website, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But let's first talk a little bit about what the Restaurant Revitalization Fund is and how it came into existence. So again, the U.S. Small Business Administration is awarding funding to restaurants, those organizations that serve food and drink. And the purpose is really to provide support to eligible entities that suffered losses during COVID-19. And we know that the restaurant industry, food and beverage industry, is one that's been hit the hardest. It actually came into law on March 11th, 2021 through the American Rescue Plan Act. And it allocated close to $29 billion in funds. 28.6 billion is what the SBA will award through the Restaurant Revitalization Fund. And actually, I'll go over a couple of things here, and you're gonna, again, as you're able to see this guide that we will provide, it's going to provide links that will take you directly back to the SBA, because the SBA, may be making adjustments. So we want to ensure that applicants have the most updated information. But part of what I will first share with you is that, again, this program is designed to support those in the food and beverage industry, and we'll go over some of the eligible entities in a moment. But the program is also focused on a couple of priority groups, and really looking to support those groups that have been hit the hardest for the first 21 days of the program. So through day 21, and by the way, the program opened on March 3rd, on Monday, May 3rd, which was Monday. And for the first 21 days, the SBA will prioritize processing and review of the applications for individuals and business owners that are women, veteran-owned, or owned by socially and economically disadvantaged individuals. And so it's important to note that this program is really believed will be oversubscribed by the SBA. So part of the information that we share, we want to make sure that you're prepared when you apply and you have all of the information. But it's important to note that priority funding for the first 21 days of the program. Also important to note that of the $28.6 billion, there are some funds that have been set aside. So again, the SBA is really looking to support those organizations that have been hit the hardest. So $5 billion has been set aside for applicants with 2019 gross receipts that are not more than $500,000. An additional $4 billion has been set aside for applicants with 2019 gross receipts that are between $501,000 up to $1.5 million. And then there's an additional $500 million that's been set aside for applicants with 2019 gross receipts that are not more than $50,000. So again, the SBA and Congress have really been intentional about providing support to those that have been hit the hardest. It's also important to note that for this program, it provides support to restaurants that meet the eligibility requirement with funding equal to their pandemic-related loss up to $5 million per physical location, not to exceed $10 million total for the applicant and their affiliated businesses. And also there is a minimum award of $1,000. What's really neat that you'll see as we go through is that it really allows for applicants to not only take a look back, but also a look forward. And it also allows applicants to use the funds. In fact, it requires that the funds are used on eligible uses no later than March 11th, 2023. So again, those businesses that are awarded will have up until March 11th, 2023 to use those funds. So let's talk about the entities that are eligible. And again, generally speaking, those entities would include restaurants, food stands and food trucks, as well as food carts, caterers, bars, saloons, lounges, and taverns. Also snack and non-alcoholic beverage bars, bakeries, and it's important to note for the next couple, be it a bakery, brew pub, tasting rooms, tap rooms, as well as breweries, wineries, and inns, it's important that they're able to show that their on-site sales to the public comprise at least 33% of their gross receipts. So those entities would have to show additional verification that their on-site sales comprise at least 33% of their gross receipts. It's also important to note that to satisfy the statutory requirement, a place of business in which the public or patrons assemble for the primary purpose of being served food or drink would be considered an eligible entity that must show that 33%. So again, when you think about those organizations that would qualify for the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, it's also about the organizations that are assembled and for the purpose for which they're assembled in terms of on-site sales that are being driven. It's also important to note that all applicants must attest in the application that the applicant is eligible to receive funding under the rules in effect at the time of the application. So what you'll find is that the application there, is comprised of attestation and verification by the applicant, but the SBA also reserves the right to request additional information to verify information entered into the application. We'll talk a little bit more in a moment about the required documents, but it's important to understand that the information that you're attesting to, the SBA could come back and require additional documentation to verify. So one of the things that's really important for the Restaurant Revitalization Fund is to understand how to calculate the fund. And this is a little bit different from some of the other SBA programs that you may be familiar with, such as the PPP. And so when you look at the calculation, and you'll see this when you go through the application, there are actually 4 calculation processes that you can use, and they're tables that you can use. So we're going to go through each of those calculations to ensure a great understanding of how to calculate your fund amount. And so the first calculation, in calculation 1, is for applicants that have been in operation prior to or on January 1st, 2019. And so you would start with your 2019 gross receipts, and you would subtract your 2020 gross receipts, and then you would back out any funding that was received for the Paycheck Protection Program. So the total amount received, be it in round 1 or round 2 for first and second draws, you would subtract that out. So to give you an example, the calculation, let's say that a business had $1 million in gross receipts or gross sales in 2019, and then in 2020 had gross receipts of $500,000 and received a total funding of $100,000 for PPP. Well, in that scenario, the funding amount for the Restaurant Revitalization Fund would be $400,000. So that's a pretty simple calculation as you're going through there for calculation 1. 2019 gross receipts minus 2020 gross receipts, and then subtracting any funding received for PPP in the first or second draw. And calculation 2 is for applicants that began operations partially through 2019. And in this scenario, we would use the SBA would use your average monthly receipts. So again, looking at your average monthly receipts for 2019, and then grossing that up by multiplying it by 12, and then subtracting from that number your 2020 gross receipts, and then backing out any PPP loan amount. So to put some numbers to that, let's say that the average gross receipts in 2019 were $50,000. And multiplying that by 12, you would come up with $600,000 as a 2019 projected, or 2019 would have been your 2019 gross receipts. And then let's say that your gross receipts for 2020 were $200,000, and then PPP loan amounts of $100,000. So in that scenario, $600,000 from 2019, backing out the $200,000 from your gross receipts in 2020, and then subtracting the $100,000 from your PPP fund would give you a fund amount of $300,000. And then there also provides a calculation for applicants that began operations on or between January 1st, 2020 and March 10th, 2021, as well as for applicants that have not yet opened but have incurred expenses during the planning and the process for the fund, for the business, for the restaurant. And so again, as you look here, there are 4 steps that you would use to calculate that for calculation 3. First and foremost, you would look at the amount spent on eligible expenses between February 15th, 2020 and March 11th, 2021. So again, taking all of the eligible expenses that were spent because you don't have any gross receipt, you would use your eligible expenses from February 15th, 2020 to March 11th, 2021. And then you're going to back out your 2020 gross receipts as well as your 2021 gross receipts through March 11th, 2021, and your PPP funding amount. So let's put some numbers to this as well. So let's say that your eligible expenses that you've paid out between the period of February 15, 2020 and March 11th was $400,000. And then your gross receipts for 2020 was $50,000. And then your gross receipts for 2021 was also $50,000. And then let's say that you had a PPP funding of $50,000 as well. So that would allow you to take advantage of a funding amount of $250,000. So it's really important to note those different calculations that can be used to find the funding amount. It's also important to note that for those entities who began operations partially through 2019, you may elect to use at your own discretion either Table 2 or Table 3, Calculation 2 or Calculation 3. It's also important to note that the SBA points out that for the use of Calculation 3, it could take longer to verify the information. So just be aware that Calculation 3 could cause a delay in the processing of the application. So just be mindful of that as you are going out and looking at the tables to use. And again, as we talked about the maximum and minimum amounts for the Restaurant Revitalization Fund. The fourth calculation is really based on organizations that have restaurants that were opened at different times. And so applicants that operate multiple locations may calculate funding amounts for their locations using separate calculation methods and then using the aggregate to come up with the funding amount. So the aggregated funding amount is limited, just remember, to $5 million per location and $10 million for total affiliates. So to give an example here, let's say an applicant owns a restaurant that has been open since 2015 and another restaurant that's been open since 2020. The applicant can elect to use the Calculation 1 for the first restaurant and Calculation 3 for the second restaurant. And then the aggregated funding amount will be listed in Table 4. And these tables you'll see in the application when you apply. You would list the aggregated amount in Table 4 of the application and indicate how many locations are used in the calculation. Another example that's really important to note is, let's say a food truck operator has 5 food trucks, and 3 food trucks have been open in operation since 2015. 1 began operating in 2020, and 1 has been purchased but is still in the process of being made ready for use. A food truck operator has only one, the food truck operator has only 1 location that is the business headquarters, and this is the key. So that food truck operator would use Calculation 1 for the calculations because the business first began in 2015. And this is really important as if you're a food truck owner and you have 1 business location for your operation, then that does not classify as having multiple locations. So it's really important to note that as you're going through the calculation process as well. I'll also point out this guide that you'll have access to, again, gives hyperlinks that will take you right back to the SBA to see the most current updated information that SBA is providing. So let's talk a little bit about the application process. Lendistry's role here is we are working directly with the SBA. And so we have, we were selected and selected by the SBA to really focus on promoting the Restaurant Revitalization Fund and also providing an application. And so we've created a site that you will be able to see that provides resources for the Restaurant Revitalization Fund. It provides and houses this guide, and it also allows you and provides a link to the application. And that can be gathered by going to lendistry.com and clicking on Restaurant Revitalization. So let's talk about the steps in the application process. Step one is completing an application with Lendistry. And once you complete the application with Lendistry, we're connected directly to the SBA. And so after you complete that and submit your application, you will receive an email from Lendistry containing your username to the SBA portal. And that's where you will then upload the required documents for review by SBA. So again, SBA is really focused on the full review of the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, and they take care of all of the funding. So that documentation will be uploaded into the SBA portal. We provide you with the username to go in, and once you sign into the SBA portal, you will then be directed to reset your password, take you in. Once logged into the SBA portal, you can then review your application, which automatically populates with all of the information you provided. So you will not need to re-enter any information in the SBA portal. That is strictly for uploading your documents. So you'll continue through the SBA application process to check the information that you've provided in the eligibility sections, as well as business details and award calculation sections, ensuring that they are correct. So you'll be able to see that application that you completed for us in the SBA portal. The next step would be for you to then go into the deposit account section. And this is important, where you're going to link your bank or you manually enter your information to set up an ACH for your direct deposit of funds. This is critical because once you are approved for funding, SBA will fund your account directly. So your bank information will be reviewed and confirmed that the account attached is to you. And that is obviously to help to cut down on fraud. But it's important to make that step as well. And then in step 5, you're going to upload all of the required documents. We'll talk about what those documents look like in a moment, but it's going to be really important that you have that documentation prepared when you go in to complete the application. Then at step 6, the SBA will review your application and all supporting documents. And if there are any missing items or issues with the application, the SBA will reach out to you directly. So again, we're helping to facilitate the start of your application to get you in line with the SBA. And then the SBA will do the full underwriting and review and funding of your application. And then obviously the final step, once you're approved by the SBA, you'll receive the grant funds via ACH to your account that you've identified and you've selected. So again, this is really designed to be a seamless process for you. And again, going through lendistry.com to apply provides you with some resources that actually the resources on our website can also be converted to other languages. Unfortunately, the application guide and the application itself are only in English, but when you go out to our website and select Revitalization Fund, there's a translate button that will allow you to translate all of the resources on the screen to another language. So again, just creating a seamless, user-friendly process for you. So let's talk a little bit about required documents. Again, and I'll go through these here. Applicants that were in operation prior to or on January 1st, 2019 must supply at the time of application documentation of gross receipts for 2019 and 2020. And again, this is critical, and this is why you want to have your documentation prepared, because if the documentation is not uploaded, it could delay the processing of your application by SBA. Applicants that began operations partially through 2019 and used calculation 2 must supply at the time of application documentation of gross receipts for 2019 and 2020. And then applicants that began operations partially through 2019 and used calculation 3 must supply at the time of application documentation of gross receipts for 2020. And again, just to note, calculation of 2003 you could see a delay in the processing of those documents and of that application. Applicants that began operations on or between January 1st, 2020 and ending on March 10th, 2021, and applicants that have not yet opened as of March 11th, 2021, but have incurred eligible expenses must apply at the time of the application. Documentation of gross receipts and eligible expenses for the length of time in operation. So that documentation must be provided. And for the purposes of this program, it's important to note that gross receipts do not include the following. So again, as you're looking at your gross receipts, these are the items that it would not include. Any amounts received from the Paycheck Protection Program for first or second draws, amounts received from the Economic Injury Disaster Loans, EIDL, advances of EIDL, state and local grants via the CARES Act or otherwise, SBA sections 1112, 1112 payments, and that's where the SBA made payments on your behalf during the period of 2020. Randolph-Shepard Act financial relief and restoration payments, taxes collected for and remitted to a taxing authority if included in gross or total income, such as your sales or other taxes collected from customers. And again, this does not include taxes levied on the concern or its employees. Proceeds from transactions between a concern and its domestic or foreign affiliates, and amounts collected for another by a travel agent, real estate agent, advertising agent, conference management service provider, and freight forwarder or customs broker. So again, looking at the required documents, here's what will be required for all applicants that are going through the Restaurant Revitalization Fund. The application, and that's SBA Form 3172, would be required as a required document. Verification for your tax information, and that is completing the IRS Form 4506T. And you really want to make sure that you're looking at your tax document and completing that form with that information in hand so that you complete it exactly the same. Some of the things that's really important to note is that for those that have received PPP funding, when you complete your application, you really want to complete it. It's the same way that you completed your PPP application. Just like with the 4506T, you want that information to reflect exactly as it does on your tax form. So again, it's also important to note that for those two forms, completion of the forms digitally on the SBA platform will satisfy the requirement. And so just noting that. And then gross receipts documentation. So any of the following documents demonstrating gross receipts and, if applicable, eligible expenses. So business tax returns, be it IRS Form 1120 or 1120S, IRS Form 1040 with Schedule C, as well as IRS Forms 1040 for Schedule F for farmers. For a partnerships IRS Form 1065, including all K1s. Bank statements can be used as well as externally or internally prepared financial statements such as your income statements or profit and loss, and then point of sales reports, including IRS Form 1099, can be used to verify as a verification for documents. For applicants that are brew pubs, tasting rooms, tap room, brewery, winery, distillery, or bakery, remember, in addition to the documents in Section 1, documents evidencing that on-site sales to the public consisted of at least 33% of the gross receipts for 2019, which again may include Tax and Trade Bureau Forms 5130.9 as well. So it's important to note that information. And then for businesses who opened in 2020, the applicant's original business model should have contemplated at least 33% of gross receipts in on-site sales to the public. So again, it should have an account for that as well. And then for applicants that are again, same thing, documentation evidencing that on-site sales of food and beverage to the public was at least 33% of the gross receipts. So let's talk about a few tips for applying, and it's really important as you're uploading documents, you want to make sure that the documents are clear and legible. So one of the things that we provide, for one, and I should step back, one, your government ID, government issued ID is required. And you'll notice that when you go through the Lendistry application, it's going to ask you to upload that government ID. It's really important that you include your ID in that process. It's also important that your ID is legible and really should be in a color format. So really including a colored picture of your government ID. For documentation, we actually provide here just an example of what the correct viewing of any documents that you're uploading should look like. And we also provide some suggested scan apps that you can use. Not everyone has a scanner that's attached to your computer, but using your smartphone, you can also use that to scan the document. So here in this application guide, we provide links that will actually take you into pulling up an app that works really well with scanning clear documents. It's also important to ensure that you are using a valid email address. So we provide information here, just giving you an idea of that as well to be helpful. And then we'll talk a little bit about the application process through Lendistry, and we'll go through some screens that'll give you a little bit of a demo of what the application process will look like. And again, you'll have access to this application guide that you can actually pull up and have in hand as you're going through the application. But we found that by looking at the screens and the information that we're going to be requesting through the application, it helps you to prepare a little bit more for the application process. So again, your application process consists of 3 steps: the completion and submission of the application, uploading of an image of your government ID, photo ID, and then connecting your bank account information. So again, as we shared, before you start your application, if you're a franchisee, please have your SBA Franchise Code ready as well. And we provide a link there for you to get that. So that's really important. Also, as you're going through that information, and we also have a line here to our call center if you need assistance with the process or with the application. So again, as we start here, this would be the first step as you go into the application. It's actually going to ask you to create an account. And part of this could take you into a waiting room. This is really used to manage the volume and flow. And so if the volume is extremely heavy at the time that you try to apply, we will actually allow you to hold your place in line through the waiting room, and then we will reconnect with you when you're able to go into the application. So setting up that account not only allows you to go in and see the application, but it allows you to get into that waiting room. That would be the first visual that you'll see. And then as you're starting it, after you have created the account and logged in, you then would create a new application. So again, clicking on new application and confirming that you want to start the new application. And then the first screen of the application provides eligibility questions. And there's a couple of things here, as you can see on the right-hand side, it'll go through what those questions are. But it's also important to note that if your answer is yes to any of these questions, you will not be, really should not continue the application because you would not be eligible. So you must answer no to all of the eligibility questions that are listed in the application. So I won't go through all of them there, but you'll actually have this as a resource before you start the application to see if you truly are eligible. Again, it'll actually ask you for your business type. And then we list here the possible business types that there could be that are eligible for the Restaurant Revitalization Fund. But again, you're going to enter on that second screen your business type and the business legal name, and if there is any DBA, and if there's any doing business as name. And then the next screen will ask you for information about your business. So again, business address for the applicants, and it's really important to know for applicants that operate mobile food trucks or carts, enter the address of the business headquarters. However, PO boxes are not permitted for any of the sections on the application. So you must have a physical address as you're entering the information there for your application. It's going to ask you to provide your identification number, either your EIN, your SSN, or your ITIN. So it's really important to note that you can use either of those. And again, I will point out, for those that have that were funded through PPP, you should use and apply with whatever you use for PPP. That's going to be really important there as well. And then we'll ask you to, you'll be asked to enter additional ownership details. So again, here, this will actually allow you to enter in whether or not you're operating under a franchise or a similar agreement, or does the applicant have affiliates? That's going to be really important as well. One of the guidelines for the Restaurant Revitalization Fund is really around the number of locations. So you can't have more than 20 locations. And so the affiliate, if you have affiliates, that could come into play as well. An affiliate is also considered a non-restaurant. So it can't be more than 20 locations, and then looking at your affiliate is really important. Again, here, if answering yes, is the applicant operating under franchise, you would answer that. Does the applicant have affiliates? You'd enter that information. And is the applicant currently operating in bankruptcy? So it's important to note that operating under an approved plan of reorganization under either a Chapter 11, Chapter 12, or Chapter 13 bankruptcy, applicant is not eligible to apply. Filed for either a Chapter 11, Chapter 12, or Chapter 13 bankruptcy, but no plan of reorganization, again, not eligible to apply. And then filed for a Chapter 7 bankruptcy and undergoing liquidation through Chapter 11 or permanently closed, you would not be eligible to apply. Next, it'll actually ask you questions about those groups that fit into the priority funding. So as we talked a little bit earlier, the first 21 days is really focused on priority funding. So the in accordance with the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, awarding funds to applicants that are small business concerns of at least 51% owned and controlled by individuals who are women, veterans, and or socially and economically disadvantaged individuals. So again, applicants in one of these categories that are operating under an approved plan of reorganization under either Chapter 11, Chapter 12 or Chapter 13 bankruptcy and do not have a trustee exercising the day-to-day control are eligible for funding under this program. So again, one of the things that's really important to note, and SBA is very specific here, is being owned by women-owned, veterans-owned, or socially and economically disadvantaged individuals. It is 51% ownership, not 50-50. So it's important to note that you must have 51 ownership to attest there. And again, in the application, you're attesting that you fall under this category. You can also aggregate this as well to qualify there. So as you can see in the example here, ownership under socially economic disadvantage as well as women. So you would check all of that apply. And then the next screen will ask you information about the owners. And it will actually allow you to list up to 5 owners. For each owner that has a minimum of 20% ownership for the business should be listed on the application. We're also going to ask about your Paycheck Protection Program loan. Remember, from the calculations, any funds that you receive through the PPP would be backed out for the funding amount. So again, looking at your PPP first draw amount, we'd be looking for whether or not you received a first or second draw. And you would click the drop-down box to answer those questions. We would require the amount of the draws, the amount of the first or second draw, and then also your PPP loan number. That is going to be important to enter there. So if you don't have that information, if you don't enter that information, it could cause delays in the processing of your application. And then we're going to ask for you to enter the information for the funding. So you're going to select which table you would use, table 1, 2, or 3, as you're going through and entering the information. And then we will automatically calculate the fund amount based on the information that you enter. So again, really important as you're going through the application to ensure that you've got the documentation in front of you and you're entering that information correctly. If the information is not entered correctly into the application, it could cause delays in the processing of your application. And the reason I keep repeating this is because the SBA expects that this program will be oversubscribed. And the program is funded on a first come, first served basis. So you want to ensure that your application is accurate and complete when you're submitting to avoid delays. We'll also ask you to indicate the purpose of the fund looking at the eligible reasons. So again, payroll costs, including paid and sick leave, business rent, business mortgage, business debt service is really important as well. To note business utilities, business food and beverage expense, business maintenance expense, the construction of outdoor dining as well. And it's important to note that you can include the construction of outdoor dining, but the cost associated with expansion would not be an eligible expense. Business supplied, covered supplier costs, and again, business operating expenses. So as you can see, it's a pretty broad category that includes the eligible expenses. And you also have up to March of 2023 to spend the funds. It's important to note that any funds that are not spent by March 2023 would have to be returned to the SBA. So it's important to note that information as well. And then obviously there would be a signer, an authorized signer would fill the information out as well. Could be one of the owners or it's someone that is designated as an authorized signer for the business. And then finally, as you completing your application, you're going to enter in your bank account routing number and account number. Again, really important to ensure that you enter this information correctly. This actually works in concert with the verification that you're doing when you go into when you're completing through SBA. So we want to ensure that we have the correct information to ensure that you've got the right two things, that you've got the right information for funding when you're approved, and then two, this helps us to cut down on fraud. So ensure that you have in front of you the accurate routing number, account type, and bank account name. And then finally, there would be a section there for terms and conditions for you to certify. And then the SMS policy, it just allows your opting in to, if you would like to be communicated through text as well. So it'll provide that information also. And then we just give a little more information here that the information around the terms and guidelines, again, uploading a copy of your government ID, that step is critical. And then noting here, you'll see it will tell you your application will not be considered as complete until you upload your government ID. Your application will be locked once you upload ID and submit. So that's really important. Once you upload your ID and submit it, you will not be able to edit your application. So you want to make sure that the information you're entering is accurate, as edits will not be able to be made in the application. You certainly could reach out to a Lendistry representative to make any changes that are needed, and even through the SBA directly, but that could affect your processing of your application. So again, I can't stress enough to ensure that your information entered is accurate. So a couple of tips, again, that I would provide, and I'll go into this and then we'll open it up for questions. But a couple of tips is, first, visit lendistry.com and click on Restaurant Revitalization Fund. That's going to take you into our site where you would complete the application, but before you get to the link of the application, gives you resources that will reiterate everything that we've just discussed here. So if you want more information on the site, on the program, it'll actually give you that information that you can look at. It's going to be really important. I would suggest that you pull up the application guide from that site and review the application before starting it. And that's basically the guide that we just went through that will provide all of the information that's needed. Probably the biggest tip is to ensure that you have all of the documentation ready and available in front of you. And before you start the application, that you take some time to identify which table you're going to use for calculating your fund amount. I can't stress enough to really ensure that the information you're entering is accurate. Unfortunately, because the program is expected to be oversubscribed and it's on a first come, first served basis, you want to minimize any delays in the processing of your application. So I know we've covered a lot in the last 50 minutes. I will pause there, Stephen, and we can open it up for any questions that might be out there.
Great. Thanks so much, Clarence, for covering all that detail. I've got 3 questions lined up here. The first one is a question around, if I have a point of sale partner or provider, should I apply through them? Should I also apply through Lendistry? I guess it's just a question about understanding where people should apply.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and one that's very common. And so Lendistry, along with the SBA, we're just providing another option. And so if you have a point of sales vendor that is participating in the application process, at this point, I think there's only 2 that actually have a direct application for the Restaurant Revitalization Fund. Certainly feel free to apply through your point of sale vendor. As you saw in some of the documentation, you can use your documentation from your point of sale provider in qualifying for this. So again, it's just to give you an option. You have an option of applying directly through the SBA, applying through your point of sale vendor that is participating in the program, or applying through Lendistry. Either way, the information is tied directly into the SBA.
Great. And the next one, I assume the answer is yes, given we saw this in the calculations that you shared, Clarence, but a question around, am I eligible if I applied for and received PPP and EIDL?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. You are eligible if you apply for and receive both. One of the things that's really important to note here, two things. One is that for the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, remember, any amount that you received funding through PPP, you're going to back that out of your funding amount, of your funded amount. So whether it's a first or second draw, whether you got it in the first round or second round, you would take the total amount of funds received through PPP, and then you would back that out to get your funding amount. It's also important to note that SBA requires that if you have a Paycheck Protection Program application in process while applying for the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, you are required to withdraw your Paycheck Protection Program application. So again, SBA is asking that if it's in process, you withdraw it. If you've been funded, then you would back the amount out.
Right. And the last question I've got queued, which is a little tricky one, but it says, I run a restaurant because of the impact from the pandemic on my operations. I predominantly operate takeout today. Does the 33% rule that you reviewed, Clarence, apply to me?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think because you still have retail sales and you have a physical location where individuals are coming in to receive the funds and to make the purchases, you are still eligible. Where it really comes into play is there are a number of organizations that only operate online. And so again, SBA and Congress is really trying to impact those businesses that have been impacted the most by the COVID-19 pandemic. So again, during delivery and doing takeout, you still would qualify as a eligible entity for the Restaurant Revitalization Fund.
Great. Thank you much, Clarence. At this time, it looks like we don't have any further questions. So I'm going to say a big thank you to Clarence for your time today and for just walking through the instructions for the Restaurant Revitalization Fund in such thorough detail. Thank you to our partners at DoorDash for making this webinar happen. We will share as a follow-up the link that Clarence referenced to apply through Lendistry if you don't have an existing application portal or partner. And we will also share a recording for this webinar for anyone who wasn't able to join. So thanks so much, Clarence, and hope everyone has a wonderful day.
Great. Thank you, Stephen.